Hi there, students. A flight of fancy. A flight of fancy. This is something that is very imaginative, but it's so complicated or just so impractical that it could never be real. So I don't know, maybe you've been drinking and you're sitting with your friend and you're talking and you go into a flight of fancy. You don't let facts or reality get in the way. You just start imagining. Or maybe a film. A film is a flight of fancy. This is just something that is totally impractical. Yes, I'm going to receive a letter from King Charles III this week inviting me to tea at Buckingham Palace. No, it's just a flight of fancy. It's just a crazy idea. So a flight of fancy is an idea, a suggestion, which is very imaginative, but it's just entirely unrealistic. It's impractical. It's very speculative. It's like a daydream. It's pie in the sky. Yes, I'm going to start training and I'm going to play for Manchester United. At my age, flight of fancy. Yeah, you're just imagining, you're daydreaming, you're imagining things that would be lovely, that would be interesting, but they're just a pure flight of fancy. So a flight of fancy, it's an imaginative idea, but it's really unrealistic. He started a campaign to become Prime Minister of the UK, but this was a flight of fancy because he didn't really have any support. It's nice sometimes to have a flight of fancy and imagine exotic vacations and things like that, but for things like that you need the money. So a flight of fancy is an idea that's out of touch with reality. It's just not possible. It's a fantastic notion, some sort of a pipe dream. So yeah, wouldn't it be lovely to own that house? Yeah, I could be sitting there in that house and it would be wonderful. It's only a house like that's only a €2 million house. No, that's a total flight of fancy. It's something that is imaginative but just not at all practical. So perhaps many of the green policies that governments suggest, they're a flight of fancy because people aren't going to implement them. Or I think many of the reductions in CO2 that governments promise, these are a flight of fancy because if they don't meet these targets, then nothing will happen to them. So it's something that's just not practical, it's not sensible, it's just not going to happen. But you know that's not a flight of fancy because it's happened before. Okay, so a flight of fancy, the fancy is talking about your imagination. It's just not practical. So yeah, taking a bicycle and going from northern Canada all the way down to southern Argentina or southern Chile to Tierra del Fuego. No, this is a flight of fancy. It's just not realistic. So, formality, a flight of fancy. I think as an idiom, I think I'm going to give this idiom a 5 in formality. I think you could use it anywhere, maybe even a 5.5 in formality. A touch more on the slightly more formal side. Use it informally, semi-formally, and in a formal writing as well. I think you might get away with it. Or maybe that's a flight of fancy. And then the idea is you are flying, your fancy, your imagination is flying in the air and doing all sorts of things, but that doesn't have to be linked to the real ground at all. So enough. A flight of fancy. What flights of fancy do you have? If you think you're going to learn perfect English in 2 weeks, that is a flight of fancy. It takes time and hard work. So enough. If you enjoyed the video, give it a rating, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you soon. Bye for now. A flight of fancy.